In the winter sky over Europe in 1944, where ice clung to the wings of fighting machines and the roaring engines drowned out every human doubt, one American pilot faced a moment that should have ended in silence, surrender, and death. But war often reveals the impossible side of human determination. And this is the extraordinary account of the pilot who, with no ammunition left, continued fighting for 30 long minutes, protecting the bombers behind him and defying the enemy who believed he was an easy kill. His name has been lost to history, buried beneath thousands of missions and millions of stories. But what he did in the frigid morning clouds remains one of the most improbable acts of courage the air war had ever witnessed. The story. He had taken off before dawn, the frost still clinging to the runway as his P-47 rumbled forward like a steel beast waking from sleep. The airfield crew had worked through the night to prepare the fighters, and his own aircraft, number 217, sat under the pale sky with a familiar vibration that comforted him more than any human voice. He tightened his gloves, settled into his seat, and pushed the throttle forward, lifting into a sky so cold it felt like the world was made of glass. His mission was simple: escort a formation of heavy bombers deep into enemy airspace and make sure at least some of them came back. It was never guaranteed. They crossed the front line 20 minutes later, and the pilot's heart rate had already shifted into that strange rhythm between fear and instinct. Smoke trails marked distant artillery. The clouds hung low, gray and torn by icy winds. Beside him, other fighters flew in crisp formation, but he knew that formation meant nothing when the enemy finally arrived, and the enemy always arrived. When the first black specks appeared on the horizon, he was already readying for combat. He pushed the throttle forward, climbed above the bombers, and scanned for altitude advantage. Within seconds, the specks grew into shapes, sleek, angular fighters diving with predatory grace. Then came the radio call from one of the bomber crews. "Bandits at 2 o'clock, closing fast." The sky erupted. He fired short, controlled bursts at the first enemy fighter that crossed his sights. The recoil rattled the cockpit, sending shivers through the canopy glass. The round struck the enemy's wing, and the fighter spiraled downward, trailing smoke. Another enemy approached from below. He rolled hard, pulled into a tight loop, and caught the second one squarely with a burst that tore the tail clean off. But the attack didn't stop. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and deep behind enemy lines, where reinforcements would never come. He fired again, another burst, another hit, until suddenly the guns refused to respond. He pressed the trigger again. Nothing. A cold spike of dread ran through his spine. He checked the instrument panel, flipped the selector, hit the trigger again. Silence. He had run dry. Out of ammunition. He looked over his shoulder. 2 enemy fighters were circling, gaining altitude, preparing to strike. Below him, the bombers lumbered forward. Massive, slow, vulnerable. If he retreated now, the entire rear formation would be torn apart within minutes. But what could he do without ammo? He exhaled once, long and controlled, then banked his aircraft back toward the attackers. A crazy idea, but one that might work. The enemy pilots expected him to break away, not challenge them. So when he dove straight at them, they hesitated just long enough for him to close the distance. He shot between the 2 fighters at terrifying speed, his prop wash shaking them violently out of position. He pulled up sharply, climbed into the sun, and forced them to follow. His radio crackled. 217, you're dry, aren't you? He didn't answer. He couldn't answer. He just kept flying. He dove again, this time getting so close to one enemy fighter that he could see the pilot's eyes widen behind the canopy. The enemy banked away instinctively, convinced the Americans still had firepower. It bought a few precious seconds. He used every trick: fake firing passes, engine boost dives, high-risk turns, even a move where he nearly clipped a bomber's wing to force an enemy to break chase. Time lost meaning. Only survival remained. On one pass, he came within meters of the tail of an enemy fighter, his engine screaming so loudly the entire frame of the aircraft trembled. He wanted the enemy to think he was still armed, to believe that any second a burst of .50 caliber fire would shred their fuselage. And strangely, impossibly, it worked. The enemy pulled away, confused, disoriented, unsettled by a foe who should have been harmless but fought like a ghost with endless ammunition. 30 minutes passed. 30 minutes of impossible maneuvers, desperate illusions, and a willpower that defied logic. When the enemy formation finally retreated, low on fuel, ammunition, and patience, the American pilot almost didn't believe it. The sky suddenly felt vast and empty, the cold wind howling through the tiny gaps in his canopy. Below him, the bombers continued their slow, determined journey home, battered but alive. He escorted them all the way back. Only when the airfield appeared in the distance did the tension in his chest finally release. His landing was rough. His hands trembled so badly he nearly missed the glide path. The ground crew rushed to his plane as he climbed out, pale, exhausted, barely able to speak. One mechanic stared at the gun barrels, then looked at the pilot with disbelief. "You've got nothing left," the mechanic whispered. "Not a single round." The pilot simply nodded. He didn't feel heroic. He felt like he had survived a storm meant to swallow him whole. But word spread quickly across the base. Other pilots approached to shake his hand. The bomber crew sent messages of gratitude. Commanding officers asked for details. But all he kept saying, in a quiet, steady voice, was, "I just did what I had to do." History would never record his name, but his impossible half-hour in the frozen sky left a mark deeper than any medal. He had fought with no ammunition, no hope of firepower, and no guarantee of survival. And yet, he had protected more lives than he would ever know. And in the cold, unforgiving expanse of the winter sky, courage alone had become his final weapon.